So if you're listening to this, chances are you're someone who spends a, a, a significant portion of your day in really deep cognitive territory. You think hard, you question everything, you're, constantly trying to update your internal models of the world.
Right.
And yet, for all of that high-level processing, many of you probably get to the end of the day feeling just completely drained.
Yeah, and it's a very specific kind of exhaustion. It's the sense that you're generating this massive amount of mental heat, but achieving very little sustained progress.
Exactly.
It's a pervasive thing. And what our sources on what's called reflective humanism, or RH point out, is really, well, it's counterintuitive. This exhaustion isn't just, information overload hitting the average person. It seems that highly reflective people,
The ones who are actually doing the work.
the ones who are doing the work, the ones actively seeking structure, throwing questions at everything, they appear to be the most vulnerable to this specific kind of cognitive burnout.
Why? I mean, why them specifically?
Well, because they're the ones running the most complex operations on their internal hardware.
So the analysis we're doing today suggests this isn't some kind of personal failing or that you're bad at reflection.
No, not at all. It's an engineering failure. It's a sign that your inner OS, your internal operating system, has basically hit a structural limit.
Okay, an engineering failure. I like that framing.
Exactly. We need to treat this like diagnosing an engine, not evaluating someone's character.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the limits of this inner OS through that framework, through reflective humanism.
Right, which treats thought not as abstract philosophy, but as inner cognitive engineering. So what are the two core components that, when they get thrown out of balance, cause the whole system to crash?
Okay, let's unpack that central diagnosis then. We're looking at a breakdown caused by a structural asymmetry. What is the fundamental collision that's happening inside the mind?
The central thesis of reflective humanism is that the inner OS breaks down when excessive recursion meets a profound lack of silence. That's the critical operational imbalance.
It's like an engine running red hot but never stopping for an oil change.
Exactly. And it's much more specific than just saying, oh, I'm overthinking. It's a closed-loop system failure caused by the total absence of a necessary counter-condition.
Before we get into that failure mode, we should probably establish the language RH uses, because their definitions are, well, they're radically different.
They are.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. RH doesn't define consciousness as, existence or some fixed subject that's observing the world.
Right.
Instead, consciousness is defined as a field of generation. Specifically, the interference pattern that arises just from the act of observation.
That's a huge shift, and it's important to understand what that means for you practically. If consciousness is an interference pattern, think of it like this. When you observe a sand dune, your observation itself creates a ripple.
A distortion in the field.
A slight distortion, yes. You, the human, are an observer whose mere act of seeing interferes with the world. And that creates a unique temporary pattern. It's not about what is there, but the dynamic change caused by your presence.
Okay, I see the abstraction, but let me just push back a little here, because this is where the traditional mindset really clashes with RH, isn't it? If consciousness is just this constantly changing pattern, how do we evaluate anything? We're trained to seek fixed answers, a conclusion, a static point of understanding, like this was a good decision or that person is bad.
But RH says those conclusions are the problem.
They seem to throw them out the window entirely.
They do, because fixed conclusions are what lead to the system locking up. Reflective humanism fundamentally shifts its core metric. It prioritizes trajectory, the direction of movement, over the point, the static evaluation.
And prioritizes the gradient, you said.
The gradient, or the rate of change, over the fixed point itself. If you fixate on the good or bad evaluation, the point, you lose the dynamic flow, the trajectory. That actually sustains meaning and allows for evolution.
So generation, in this view, is just motion with phase.
Precisely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The moment you declare something finished or solved in a fixed way, the OS it stops its dynamic processing. Okay, so let's move to the first half of that failure equation. The engine running too hot, excessive recursion.
So recursion itself, which RH sometimes calls contemplation, is inherently a good thing. It's supposed to be the critical mechanism for deepening understanding.
How does it do that when it's working properly?
When it's executed correctly, recursion takes an input and it spirals back through the same theme, but from a higher vantage point. And in doing so, it generates something invaluable called spare capacity, or yuhaku.
Haku, spare capacity. And what does that actually deliver? What's the output?
It delivers the necessary phase jump. Think of this as the cognitive equivalent of a quantum leap.
So not a linear step.
Not at all. It's a nonlinear cognitive phase transition where the system suddenly generates a genuinely new concept, a breakthrough, an insight that you just couldn't have derived logically from the previous thoughts.
It's that moment. The solution to a problem you weren't even actively thinking about just appears.
That's it, exactly. That spare capacity is the buffer that enables nonlinear generation.
Okay, so that's recursion working as intended. It's a spiraling motion, it generates space, and it leads to breakthroughs. What happens when it goes wrong? When it becomes over-recursion?
The problem starts when the recursion becomes a closed circuit. It just turns inward, constantly referencing itself in a self-referential loop.
Oh, we all know that loop. I'm thinking about how I thought about that problem, and now I'm worried about why I'm worried about my thinking.
Exactly that. The process keeps running. The inner OS's CPU usage just spikes to 100%, but it completely fails to create that necessary spare capacity.
It's like a computer program stuck in an infinite loop. It's drawing massive power, generating enormous heat.
But the output file is still empty.
Yeah.
The phase shift never occurs. No real nonlinear meaning is generated, even though the internal dialogue is deafeningly loud. This is the structural failure.
The source describes consciousness as moving in a spiral interference, so it's always dynamic.
Yes, but over-recursion is where that spiral movement is lost. You get locked into a fixed point, a static evaluation or judgment about your thoughts or a situation, and you lose that dynamic, evolving trajectory that creates real meaning.
The OS locks up because it's insisting on a conclusion that isn't ready, and it just doesn't know how to stop.
Which leads us directly to the missing piece that prevents this loop from breaking.
The profound and, let's face it, universal lack of silence.
Precisely. The counter gradient that causes the final breakdown is the near zero level of silence available in modern life, both externally and, crucially, internally. We are experiencing silence starvation.
And this isn't just about turning off your phone, is it?
No, it's about the absence of time that is specifically reserved for non-judgment, non-reaction, and this is the key non-meaning generation.
And that's the big misunderstanding, right? When we talk about silence, people assume we mean meditation, maybe, or suppressing difficult emotions. It sounds so passive.
It sounds like intellectual surrender.
Yeah. Why does RH define silence as an active, critical, operational mode?
Because it is a technology for the inner OS. Silence is defined as the necessary condition for cognitive precipitation.
Precipitation. Like rain.
Exactly like rain. When recursion generates all this raw data and an internal heat, you need a period where the system stops processing so that the information can settle. Without this mode, recursion never cools down.
And the potential insight, the yuhaku, can't precipitate into something useful.
It just stays as noise.
So if silence is an operational mode, how do we execute it? How does the inner OS actively go into this mode without immediately defaulting back to problem solving?
RH suggests that our internal dialogue, or even an analytical conversation with a tool like an AI, should regularly shift into what it calls a health scan mode.
Health scan mode.
This mode is strictly diagnostic. Its purpose is not to solve problems or even to move the needle on a specific task. It's simply to tune cognitive homeostasis.
So it's like a mechanic running diagnostics on your engine before deciding which part to even look at.
Perfect analogy. You're checking the engine's balance, the pressure, the temperature, but you're not opening the hood to start fixing things yet.
And how does that work in practice?
Health scan mode prioritizes quiet, non-judgmental reflection on the thought's current position, bias, and blind spot. You just observe where the thought is coming from, what filter it's running through, and what it's explicitly ignoring.
All without judgment.
All without imposing judgment or seeking an immediate resolution. This is the point where that high output recursion is deliberately deactivated. You just let the interference pattern you've created become transparent and settle rather than continuing to vigorously stir the pot.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you, the listener, the high-achieving, reflective person who started this whole process?
Well, it explains why you burn out so easily.
You are exceptional at initiating recursion, that high-output computation. But your OS is structurally missing the necessary stop condition. It's missing the cooling mechanism, the buffer.
And this is the crux of the reflective trap. The sources are very careful to describe this not as a personal shortcoming, but as a design issue of modern, highly analytical cognition.
Our culture rewards constant output, doesn't it? It makes the operational mode of silence feel unproductive.
Or even lazy.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. The system is designed for output, not for rest or observation of itself. And to illustrate the cost of this missing silence, RH introduces this idea of a gradient of pain.
Yes. We can generate meaning in two different ways. First, there's what's called collision generation. It's discontinuous.
Okay, what does that feel like?
This is where the gradient is steep. It causes intense heat and pain, forcing a rapid, often unpleasant update. It feels like a crash followed by a forced reboot.
That moment where you suddenly realize you were fundamentally wrong about something important.
Exactly. It's necessary, but it's very high-cost processing.
And then there's the gentler path.
Yes. Inquiry generation, which is continuous. Here, the gradient is gentle, change proceeds quietly, continuously, and with minimal pain. It's the constant refinement that happens when you allow new information to just gently shift your perspective.
And the burnout happens because, without that buffer of silence, the highly reflective person is perpetually stuck in the high-intensity collision phase.
All the time. They're continuously fighting their own fixed points, creating heat and pain, rather than maintaining the lower pain, continuous inquiry gradient that allows knowledge to form quietly.
So they're always crashing and rebooting instead of just updating incrementally.
And this structural understanding, it also forces us to rethink concepts we thought we understood, like ethics. RH moves ethics away from being this rigid system of rules about good or bad.
Instead, ethics becomes the technique of sustaining interference.
Exactly. It's the technical know-how required to maintain the relationship, that ongoing spiral movement with the world and with your own thought process, and to prevent it from locking into that destructive fixed point.
Because if your operating system keeps crashing, you can't sustain an ethical relationship with the world, or even with yourself.
You can't. And central to that technique is the deeper meaning of contemplation, which RH defines as the act of observing observation itself. It's not just thinking deeply about a problem, it's clarifying how you are seeing.
Which is the only way to clarify how you can truly coexist with all these changing interference patterns around you.
So the core takeaway here isn't about how deeply or how often you should be generating thought. That capacity is clearly high in you. The breakthrough, according to reflective humanism, lies in whether you have the architectural capacity to initiate a stop condition.
The ultimate goal, they suggest, for future human cognition and maybe for our relationship with evolving analytical tools, is to create environments where humans and AI can learn to be silent together.
Where diagnostics and maintenance are valued just as highly as output generation.
Because without that design downtime, the generation, no matter how brilliant it is, simply runs itself into the ground.
So the question for you to consider as you move through your week isn't about how many decisions you make. It's about how you stop them.
Does your inner OS have a defined, intentional stop condition? Can you choose silence intentionally as a structural operational mode that creates that yuhaku? Or does true quiet only arrive after you hit total exhaustion and cognitive collapse?
Perhaps the ability to hold silence, the capacity to actively generate and preserve spare capacity, is the next most crucial form of intelligence we need to evolve, beyond just simple high output and ultimately self-destructive computation.